Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Would you like to start by introducing yourself, Charlie?
Sure, I'm Charlie Thomas. I know a lot of people on this call, um, but I am the Louisiana representative for bike law, and my law practice really focuses on all things at the intersection of cycling advocacy and cycling crashes as they relate legally. And I'm a huge fan of Bike Easy. I also chair the policy and design committee for Bike Easy, which is a big driver of a lot of what Bike Easy focuses on month to month and really year to year in terms of how Bike Easy interacts with policies relating to biking and also the design of roadways that might be suggested to local governments. And Laura, you and I have the privilege of working together a whole lot with programs like this, where we just take good information that some of it might be known, some of it might not be known, but just making sure that everybody's on the same page with what the laws are, how they apply, best practices, things like that, because there's a lot of misinformation out there in the world, not just with people who ride, but people who are driving and law enforcement. So packaging up a lot of maybe where some of the confusion is into one succinct presentation that's all based on the law and very sound principles that have been established. So, Laura, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Laura Harris. I'm the education programs coordinator of Bike Easy. So I help, coordinate programs like this. All of our workshops are now virtual. So thanks y'all for joining our very first ever virtual bike law legal clinic. So Bike Easy, we do all things related to education, advocacy, encouragement. So normally that looks like, doing everything from working with kids in schools to advocating for better bike infrastructure and safer streets and just doing fun bike rides and events. So hopefully we'll get back to all of that more soon. Check out Bike Easy's website for more info about upcoming events and workshops just like this. And also before we get started, just a little Zoom housekeeping. I went and muted all of y'all. So let's all try to stay muted if we're not speaking so there's not weird background noises happening while Charlie is speaking. So if you do want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself. Also, I want to encourage everyone to use the chat feature. And if you want to have questions during the presentation, maybe I can answer the question. You can just pop it into the chat. Otherwise, we can go through anything at the end of the presentation. Sounds good to everyone?
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right. Let's
All
get
right.
started.
So, Laura, just back me up here. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, looks great.
I'm doing it. I'm doing it right. Okay, perfect. We've had a lot of Zooming over the past 6 weeks, but screen sharing is something that's really new to me. So here we go. So this presentation is all about, instead of just me feeding you the laws in terms of here's what law 1 says, here's what law 2 says, we're just going to apply it with a virtual bike ride around New Orleans, just as a good setting for this, focusing on Louisiana state laws as well as local ordinances. So we're starting on Esplanade Avenue, and we're going to head from the city park area towards downtown. And so the first thing to talk about is you're looking at a street like this, where you've got one moving travel lane and maybe a parked lane on the side, but no actual bicycle lane here. Let's talk about the dynamic of people who are driving passing somebody who's riding. So what Louisiana law says is that if a car or any sort of motor vehicle is passing somebody riding a bike, the pass needs to be safe as minimum distance, leaving a minimum distance of 3 feet or more. So we'll hear about 3-foot laws that are in certain places. Louisiana has a statewide 3-foot law. Certain cities are able to enact their own 3-foot laws or safe passing laws. Louisiana doesn't have a need for that just because we have a law covering the entire state. Texas, for instance, does not have a minimum distance for passing somebody on a bike. So there are, at this point, probably around 30 different cities in Texas. I think Texas has somewhere around 960 something cities. So piecemeal is being passed around Texas, but all that would be knocked out and passed it to where Canada has not vetoed it. So Louisiana has a statewide 3-foot law, but it's also very important to know that we need a safe path you at 36 inches, that's technically 3 feet. But if there's a speed difference of 60 plus miles an hour, and there's absolutely no need for a vehicle of that size to be passing somebody that closely, that really wouldn't constitute a safe pass. It's much harder to prove that or erase some objection later on without video footage, and we can talk about that. But the law says safe pass in a minimum of 3 feet. So this law was passed in 2009 with another statewide law on bicycle harassment. And the law says you can't harass, taunt, or maliciously throw objects at people who are riding bikes. And this law was put into place again with the 3 foot law, with the emphasis on and recognizing that people who ride bikes are valid roadway users and they're more vulnerable. So let's just make sure that we're giving them a bit more room. And I mean, the harassing somebody on a bike law, it's sad that that had to be passed, just because that should be just either couched under another law or common sense. But either way, it's on the books. What we found, though, was that it really hadn't been used uh, for years after it was passed. We had a chance to use it when the gentleman pictured in this pic in front of you now rode by my daughter and me several years ago, and it was actually on that stretch of Esplanade that I had shown you before in a few slides prior. My 2-year-old at the time was being pulled on one of the Burley trailers right behind. It was a Sunday morning. We were having a great morning. This guy flies by us going way too fast and way too close to us. And I was flush right after it happened, just thinking like, what happened if he was 6 inches to the right? I ended up catching up with him at the traffic light. It was a block or two ahead, just rolled up right next to him and asked him to roll his window down. He rolled his window down. I asked him if he would leave us some more room next time because he passed us way too close and way too fast, and it scared me. And he started flicking me off and basically saying he didn't want to hear it. And I told him, no, we've got a 3 foot long Louisiana. You've got to, not harass us, but also leave us at least 3 feet of space if you're going to pass somebody on a bicycle. And so at that point, he basically said, how about I get out of my car and F you up in front of your kid? And so I knew that that would not have ended well, uh, however it would have ended. But I didn't want to let it go there. So I got home that day. I told my spouse, Jenny, what had happened. She didn't like that, obviously, and basically banned me from riding at that point with our 2-year-old on the roads just because she didn't want some guy like this ruining our lives. And I understood that. But at the same time, this guy took something away from me, which is I like riding bikes and I like to spend time with my kids. So if I can't really do that anymore, I was upset about that. So we wrote him a letter right after this. I looked him up based on his license plate. I recorded everything at the scene into my cell phone and sent an email to myself of what was said. And I just ran his plate, got his information, sent him a letter saying, I'd like to file a claim with your insurance company. And he ended up calling our office after he got the letter and yelling at our receptionist, which I was really encouraged by because I knew we'd gotten the right guy who seems to have an anger problem. And so ultimately, we ended up filing suit because I gave him the opportunity to come to my office and look at me in the eyes and apologize to me. And if he did that, I told him we would drop it. We'd been reached out to by a friend of his in the meantime, who was a lawyer, who owned a couple of bars and told me there must have been some misunderstanding. This guy's a very nice gentleman who's a bouncer at one of his bars, and clearly just something happened where we've got a difference of opinion. And I told him there was zero misunderstanding. I know exactly what happened, and we're going to file suit against him unless he wants to come try and make this right. So I think in standard bully fashion, never heard from him. So we filed suit against him. The Geico adjuster was very confused by the whole thing just because he hadn't actually hit me. So how could I have suffered any sort of damage or injury? So I explained it. It really didn't resonate. So we set it for trial. And finally, the Geico attorney who was assigned to the case was able to talk to his adjuster about what was going to happen. And it was going to be my word versus this guy's in an Orleans Parish Court where I was going to be able to explain how this impacted me. What I really wanted to do because this started out with him just not passing us safely, but then turned into harassment. And what I wanted to do was set the standard and set the precedent for when somebody is harassed on their bike. First of all, if the law is never used saying you can't harass somebody, it's not worth anything. But I wanted to set a value to it, and that had not been done. So we ended up settling the case. It was going to be for $5,000, but Geico wanted confidentiality with that, and I told them the whole reason for this is so I can publicize it, like, and I bought the confidentiality back for $500. The check went straight to Bike Easy. And so here it is in Louisiana right now. The current established value for harassing someone on a bike is $4,500. That's the one case on the books, Thomas versus Arbona. And so we've got a little step-by-step process. If somebody is harassed, if they want to take these steps, they'll necessarily even need an attorney to go file a claim against the insurance company. And what I wanted to do was with this guy, it was very easy for him to be a tough guy behind the wheel. And he never thought that some guy who was pulling his kid on the bike was going to catch up with him and actually call him out on this. So there's some personal satisfaction knowing that I filed a claim with his insurance. He was at fault. His insurance premiums went up, and they certainly should based on what he did. But also knowing that whatever happens on the streets like that does not need to be resolved there. There's a process for handling this after the fact so that nobody's getting hurt or shot or the dispute's escalating. So we'll move on. We've got some steps to take if you are harassed. Get the license plate number. Write down as quickly as you can exactly what happened. Describe everything from the situation to the other person, the vehicle, anything like that. Feel free to reach out to me. We can send a warning letter after looking up their plate and finding out who their insurance company is. And then, of course, riding with cameras is so key in terms of avoiding a he said, and just understanding from a very objective viewpoint what happened. The next video I'm going to show you is from a client of mine. She was in Texas riding outside of Galveston. She had a 360 camera, which takes camera footage of all 360 degrees of peripheral vision as she's riding. And so this is her riding well on the small shoulder, but it's certainly there. This is a 2-lane highway on one side. So there's a median and then another 2 lanes. So technically a 4-lane highway. And no reason that the person that's about to pass her couldn't have just moved over into the left lane. Play it one more time. So going back and looking at the footage, you can barely see daylight between her left knuckles and the side of this truck, which you can also see is over the white line. So again, this happened in Texas. She approached the Galveston Police Department and said, "Can you do something about this?" And they said, "Well, you weren't hit, so there's really nothing we can do." And Texas doesn't have a 3-foot law that applies statewide. There's a lot of times we'll hear an officer say something too along the lines of, "Well, I didn't personally see this happen. I can't sign a ticket," which is really an affidavit swearing out that a crime happened. And so our response to that is always, well, you didn't see the murder happen, but you can still go investigate and see if all the information leads to something like that. So video evidence is kind of the same thing where they don't necessarily need to see it happen, but if they have it on probable cause or good authority that it did happen, this is the proof. And that's much better than you can imagine this lady going to the Galveston Police Department after the fact and saying, somebody passed me very close and it was scary, and they would have laughed her out of the building. So at least the video helps with that. Now the result is, and we were very displeased by Galveston PD not wanting to do something with this. We went to the Galveston City Council together, and the Galveston City Council enacted their own safe passing law to apply across the Galveston area. So that was a pure result of this one video happening. So again, steps like these, make a difference. At the same time, we're just lucky that this guy wasn't more to the right, even a couple of inches. I don't have it in this presentation, but just so you know, if we pan to the left and looked inside the head looked like it was down. So cell phone, lighting a cigarette, whatever it was. We don't think it was intentional is my point. Either way, it doesn't really matter if she's dead. You know, the result's still the same, even though the intent is different. With the video evidence, there are three main types. You can have it on the vehicle or on a bike. There are private security cameras on buildings that are everywhere now. And we also have public or government cameras watching traffic, there for emergencies, very big brother type. One of the most recent ones that we received, I'm going to share a video with you all, is of a dog strike. And we're all pretty pro canine at Bike Law. And I've got two dogs of my own, but we are much more in favor of people who are taking care of their dogs and making sure they're on leashes and that everything is safe. So I'm going to share my screen with the video that I'm about to play. And Laura, you're my Zoom. Share my screen with the dog. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So what you're about to see here is from the right side of the screen, there is a dog that is off leash that's about to come out of this field. And we have a Texas A&M student who's a PhD candidate riding his bike back home. So here he comes. So the dog flies out right in front of him. He tries to brake, swerve, can't avoid it. The collision does about $500 worth of damage to his bike. He goes up to the family right after this and is asking them for their information so we can follow up with them after the fact. They're just ignoring him. They're walking off. He's pretty frustrated by it. He tells them, I'm going to call the police unless somebody gives me the right contact information. And so this guy right here then gives him a fake name and a fake phone number. So student goes home, next day calls the number, not in service, looks up the guy who's not a real person in the Bryan College Station area. So we take this video and we basically send it around in Texas. We publish it on our Bike Club blog and we send it to local media outlets in Bryan College Station. Within, I want to say like 2 hours, I was getting this guy's name emailed to me so that we could then go find him. And then since then, we've been contacted by an attorney for this guy saying, oh, well, we wanted to do the right thing and reach out. And he saw this video. And it's like, we understand. Like this guy was hoping he was getting a free pass and would never see this bicyclist again. And then once people started forwarding him the video of himself, because he's, again, on camera and it's being circulated around now, then he wanted to at least try and reach out and make some amends. I did ask his attorney, when his attorney called me and reached out, can you share his real name with me since he gave the fake name? And he said, well, I'm not at liberty to do that. And I said, that's okay. We know it anyways. I just wanted to see how much you want to actually make it right. And that's my answer. All right, back to our slides. Laura, are we back?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. If anybody's using dash cams when they drive too, same sort of thing. After this video, I put a dash cam in my car. What this video shows is one of my bicycling friends who was driving this day. He's about to exit at the Chapatoulas exit in New Orleans. He gets rear-ended, and the person who rear-ends him, they both pull over. My client and friend goes to the car behind him just to on this guy who hit him and see, you okay? Behind him, sees this guy, his guy in his young 30s, his eyes are rolling back in his head. This is at like 1:30 or 1:09 in the afternoon on a weekday. This guy is slurring his speech, just some bad signs. So the guy who hits our friend here says, "Don't worry, I'm not going to leave the scene." To which our friend says, "Why would you even say that? But let me call the police." So what this video shows is the hit, and so you can see that acceleration right there, where all of a sudden you're flying forward, and the impact totaled our guy's car. So pull over, wait for a minute, and then as our client is on the phone with the police, the guy behind him just takes off. And so you'll see a gray Jeep that pulls out in just a second here and then flies into the lanes. There it goes. So right into the lanes of traffic to go over the bridge to the West Bank, and he's gone. So the good thing about the dash cam is, number one, got the Jeep, got the license plate. And so our guy was on the phone with the police and telling them, like, he just left the scene, but he was able to provide the license plate number from seeing it and then confirming it with the dash cam. Um, we tracked this guy down. We had to file suit. I deposed him not too long ago, and I was asking him, would it surprise you to learn that you left the scene, and surprise my guy that you were leaving the scene? And he's like, yes, that was surprising. Like, he wasn't expecting me to leave. It's like, you didn't give him your name, you didn't give him your phone number, anything like this. And so if he was basically just saying, oh no, I had to get home so that I could watch my children because my significant other had to go to work, what you're not capturing if you don't have the video like this is the speed at which she was rushing off. So when you add everything up, it's completely unbelievable. But at the same time, a video like this will help identify somebody, and it'll help show exactly what was going on. Dog strike, and the person lying, a hit and run, car crash, things like that. A lot of you may have seen this before. This was a camera mounted to the side of the World War II museum that captured a hit and run of Rebecca Abernathy, who was riding in the bike lane. Based on the surveillance footage on the side of this building, we were able to send this to the local media outlets. And based on, even though it's kind of grainy, this picture of the car, we're able to track down the driver within a couple of weeks, and the police ended up charging him. So anyways, just cameras, even though they can be somewhat big brotherish, we found that they've served a great purpose with people who are really trying to evade responsibility. We're going to head on over to Royal Street and right across the French Quarter now. What we're going to be talking about for the next few moments is riding under the influence. And this is, pretend this is happening. Which of these are not allowed? Riding under the influence on the sidewalk, against traffic, through stop signs, without hands on handlebars, after picking a friend up on your handlebars, at night without lights, without brakes, or a horn or a bell on your bike, or a helmet. So jumping right into it, it is not unlawful to ride if you are impaired. The only way you can get a DUI under current Louisiana law is if you are operating a motor vehicle, and that is a vehicle with a motor as defined in our Louisiana legal definitions. State versus Carr is the Louisiana Supreme Court case that addressed this in 2000. And in that case, I believe it was a gentleman in Lafayette who was riding his bike while intoxicated. He was charged with DUI and went all the way up to the Supreme Court, who said, you know what? The law is very clear, and we're looking at this under the DUI statute. To get a DUI, you need to be operating a motorized vehicle, or aircraft or watercraft or other means of conveyance. So if you are operating a sailboat, same sort of thing. As long as it doesn't have a motor on it, you should be not able to be charged with this. And please don't take this as we're encouraging somebody to ride impaired. You can still be charged with public intoxication. And there's a number of other issues that could, of course, arise. It's certainly better than getting behind the wheel of a car. But at the same time, you cannot get a DUI while you're on a bike. The unknown there right now is, what about electric bikes that do have electric motors? Under the definition of a DUI, it seems like it could apply because this is a vehicle now that has a motor. if you look up the definition of electric bicycle, which there's a definition for it under Louisiana law, it seems to not be considered a motorized vehicle under all other aspects of the law. So the takeaway from this presentation is pretend like it does apply and prepare for the worst, just because you wouldn't want that to go against you. Duty to ride not on the sidewalk unless you're 14 years old or younger in Orleans Parish. There's no statewide law saying that you cannot ride on the sidewalk. As Les and Laura would tell you, it's not a great practice to ride your bike on a sidewalk for a lot of reasons. That's where pedestrian traffic is. That's where that's just a bicycle is considered a vehicle. So you really have a duty to ride in the same direction as traffic in the streets as far to the right as practicable. The disconnect will happen, and we'll see it when somebody is riding on a sidewalk and there's a crash, or they're coming off of a sidewalk and they're in a crosswalk and there's a traffic collision. And who's in the wrong? Should the cyclist get a ticket for riding on the sidewalk or in a crosswalk? And so in Orleans Parish, the law is set. If you're 14 or under, it's okay. If you're over 14, you really shouldn't be doing it. But elsewhere, we look at it from the standpoint of you don't have to have permission to do something, even if a bike is a vehicle. If you're not supposed to do something, and you can be charged criminally for it. So even if it's a traffic citation, but you can be stopped, charged with a traffic crime, there needs to be an express prohibition in the law telling you you can't do that. We can't have very vague and murky criminal laws. The criminal laws need to be very clear and be able to be understood by anybody out in our community. So unless there's a statewide law saying you can't ride in a crosswalk or you can't ride on a sidewalk, by default, it's not illegal. Perhaps, again, not a best practice. One of the things that I did want to show you is a video of a young man, this was in Texas as well, who was riding his bike on a sidewalk. And here's just the potential of what can come out of this, which is, again, a reason alone not to ride your bike on a sidewalk. All right, so just the quick layout. This structure right here on the right side of the frame is a parking garage. As we look down, there's a sidewalk right under these trees underneath this canopy right here. And so we've got our bicyclist who's not yet in view coming from this way. The other thing that's important to note, this case is ongoing, and we're having a big disagreement about something right now, but right here, if you can see my blue arrow, there's a stop sign for anybody who's exiting this traffic garage. So take a look just at what happens. We have this on a couple of different angles, and what we're seeing is, hey, this person driving the pickup truck didn't stop at all. Neither did the bicyclist. But at the same time, part of the reason that sidewalk riding is not a best practice, although sometimes, and arguably look at this, it's not like this is a very low stress bicycle way on this 6-lane wide street with turning lanes right adjacent to a college campus. But also that when people are pulling out like this, if you're coming the other way on a sidewalk, even though they should look to their right, just to make sure there's no pedestrian traffic coming, they're not always doing that. So again, just a practical reason why that's not a great practice, even though it's not technically illegal and people should be looking. All right, Louisiana law considers bicycles to be roadway vehicles, so therefore under the law, people riding have the same rights and the same duties. I will point out this from my coronavirus riding observations. I've been riding more over the past 6 weeks than I have probably since college, and just yeah, it's a weird time, and I need to get out of it. I've seen a lot of what I'll consider more novice riders, and you can just tell people maybe haven't been riding as often as they are now, or they're getting into it because we have more time now and the weather's been so pleasant. Um, you need to have one hand on the handlebar. It seems almost like there is some sort of uh, merit badge that you would get if you can ride around with your back straight up and you're pedaling without having your hand on the handlebar. People seem incredibly proud of riding this way. I see it in the park. I see it on streets. It frightens the heck out of me just because I don't want to be passing them in my car or on a bike, and all of a sudden, like, they catch a gust of wind or hit some weird pavement and swerve over, and then all of a sudden you're finding yourself in a bad situation. But it is actually Louisiana state law that you need to keep one hand on your handlebar at all times. You also can't carry more people on your bike than it was designed to carry. So another state law, riding with lights, no need during the day, but at the same time, at night, you need to have a front light. It used to be that you needed a rear reflector, uh, and less. It's changed to a light, hasn't it?
Yeah, you have to have a light as well in the rear. You also, if I remember right, don't you have to also have reflectors to the sides? I don't recall.
My
Yeah,
understanding.
you need to have lights front and back, red and white, and reflectors that can be seen from each side.
Yeah.
And I know there's a law requiring bicycle retailers to sell the bikes with those reflectors on them as well. But the law did change from just having a rear reflector a few years ago to where you do need a rear light. That's the state and Orleans Parish laws. This is interesting. We're seeing a bunch of bikes now that are track bikes that don't have brakes on them, like actual grip a disc or grip the rim type brakes. And so they're called fixed gear bikes. It's a direct drive system to where you can pedal forwards or backwards, and the rear wheel's going to turn just depending on which way you pedal. And so some very skilled riders who use these for bikes can actually make the rear wheel skid just by exerting enough pressure to where you're locking up the drivetrain. So is that considered a brake, which you would need to have in Louisiana? And so the law says you need to have a brake that allows the bike to skid on dry, level, clean pavement. And so we have not seen an answer to this in the courts. There are areas such as DC and New York saying, hey, it doesn't matter if you have a brake as long as you can make the rear wheel skid. And the reason that would be important is if there's an allegation that somebody riding a bike wasn't able to quickly stop in time to avoid a crash or avoid being doored. And if blame is being pointed at somebody riding the bike, that their bike may have been not legally set up if it doesn't have a caliper brake. But that is a duty under Louisiana law that you need to be able to make the wheel skid. There's an Orleans municipal code ordinance requiring you to have some sort of an audible device, a noise-making device that you can hear from 100 feet away. Could this be your voice? The courts have not ruled on that. Either way, I'm not sure I've ever seen a case where this has been at issue. I will say that more recently, I've been putting tiny bells on my handlebars, and it's so effective if I'm up on the levee or riding somewhere where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic too. Just as a polite little tooting, hey, I'm coming up behind you, as opposed to just yelling at somebody on your left, and then there's confusion and somebody moves left instead. So not a state law to have a noise-making device, but it is still an Orleans Parish ordinance. There's no duty to ride with a helmet if you're over the age.
Charlie, may I
Yes.
ask a question relevant to that last slide?
Go ahead, Bill.
Would a whistle be okay?
That should check with definitely the spirit of the law, and I would imagine the letter of the law too. You know, if you get cited for having a whistle, and this law applies to you, and somebody's saying that you violated it, call me and we'll go take that on together.
Don't worry.
My view is that would constitute a noise-making device.
Right. And my wife and I both ride with whistles every time we ride. And I got whistles that are different from either a police whistle or a coach's whistle. So it couldn't be, I couldn't be accused by a traffic cop or something of interfering with,
That-
yeah, but I always ride with a whistle, and people with headphones or people in cars with the windows rolled up cannot hear the bell go tink tink, and I use my whistle probably every other day.
I would say that is a great practice, and that should certainly, in my opinion, check the box of riding with a noise-making device.
Awesome, thank you.
Of
Charlie,
course. Good job.
Charlie,
Yeah,
I would check on that because there are, in a lot of places, whistles are explicitly prohibited. I mean, I know this probably not tested in Louisiana, but in other states, there are some instances where whistles are prohibited.
And I've read about that as well, which is why I selected a whistle that was markedly different from a police whistle.
Good point. I'm gonna research this after just to see what Louisiana law says about any sort of whistle prohibition.
Thanks.
So unless it's a good point, you might be checking the box of you've got a noise-making device, but I wouldn't want you to violate the can't have a whistle law. So,
And really, my thought process is I don't care if it's going to save my life or my wife's life. I'll gladly pay the $200 ticket or whatever it is, if in fact it comes to that. But I think there's no choice for me at this point.
the good news is the fine for having a whistle improperly is probably not a whole lot more than if you killed somebody on a bike with your car. So, again, if anything happens, call me. We'll go fight that together before some bad law is made.
Don't worry.
But look, the whole reason for all of this is, is it safe to ride or is it legal to ride in certain ways? If somebody's getting pulled over, law enforcement has probable cause to stop a bicyclist for any sort of minor traffic infraction. So we want people to know, hey, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. Just because we've got a Fifth Circuit case right here where erratic riding, swerving from one side of the road to another, not having either hand on the handlebars, and not having lights at night, any of those factors were grounds for the bicyclist to get pulled over. And I think in that case, there were worse consequences for him than minor traffic infractions. It was what happened after that. But just in terms of constitutional rights, if you are violating the law, and traffic laws are the law, you are opening yourself to get pulled over by law enforcement because they would have probable cause to do so. And we're going to run over to Magazine Street. Louisiana law, don't unsafely open your vehicle's door. That law has been on the books for, I think, since the 70s. It's not bicycle specific. It's just you can't open your door into traffic if it's going to interfere with somebody passing you or if it's not safe to do so. It's a pretty open-ended law. And we'll see this citation given in this law used a lot when people are doored on their bikes. We've been seeing a highly increased risk of dooring with rideshare like Uber and Lyft, just because you have people who are driving who aren't necessarily from the area that they're driving in, and they're not pulling over all the way sometimes or pulling over in a safe place to let passengers in or out. And so at that point, passengers are just opening the door wherever they are, typically without checking. They're in the back seats. They don't have a side view mirror right there. And it's kind of a bad situation. I have started seeing notices from my Uber app of saying, before you get out, look and make sure there's no bicyclists, which I appreciate. That's at least a step there. But I think more information could still be disseminated to drivers from Uber and Lyft about how to safely let somebody out. Steps to take after a crash if you're in one. Number one, obviously seek medical attention. Number two, I can't stress the importance of this. Call the police, file a report. You want to take as many pictures as possible at the scene. If there's any independent witnesses, They could be gone within seconds. Shoot them a text message, get their name and number for later on if you would need them. Don't negotiate with the other person at the scene. Just exchange information. Let the police come and write a report. If you need to tell the police what happened, don't make otherwise committal statements to anyone following the crash. Like if somebody's calling you and they're from an insurance company, it's not a good setup to exchange that information. Don't put anything on social media to the extent you can avoid it. A lot of people will write, "Oh, I'm fine," or "I'm okay," and then after the fact, that's being used against them, even if they've got some serious injuries that are manifesting. We'd recommend you to write something just so people who are concerned know. Like, just write something like, "Hey, I'm alive." Um, Call an attorney just to discuss your options. There are all sorts of different issues that might apply with some sort of a bike crash case. Don't get on your bike and ride it again without having it fully inspected, just because there might be some sort of a crack or a broken component that could lead to a worse result if it's undetected. And then consider having a medical power of attorney in place with somebody. I'll say this too, with crash reports, the reason that we think they're so important and why they should be completed, what goes into them, all that. I'd like to take a section. Laura, you'll recognize this as a new section of the presentation. The reason for crash reports, it's multi-level. First is just record keeping. If you're involved in a crash and you need to find out something after the fact, who the other person was, their insurance company, this is the official record that's out there in terms of what happened with the crash and the police investigation. What I'd like to show y'all is the law, if I can navigate over there. We're running short on time. I'm just going to tell you about it. The law says that a crash report needs to be issued if there's over $500 in property damage or if anybody is injured in a crash. We have seen solely through NOPD and no other law enforcement agencies, an officer respond to a crash. Whoever's in the crash, let's say the bicyclist who has been doored or is otherwise very hurt, has been carted off to the ER. The driver, who may or may not be responsible but is otherwise implicated, will tell the responding officer, "We're just going to handle this civilly. You don't need to write a report." And the officer will sometimes say, "Okay, cool." The officer leaves and our person's getting out of the hospital with zero information on who they were in the crash with or a way to look up the report or anything like that. So we'll have to reach out to the district of NOPD where the crash happened, find out through the commander who actually was responding to the scene, and then very nicely try and coax. But it is Louisiana law that a crash report needs to be completed, again, if there's any injury or if there's property damage over $500. If you are a person who is involved in a crash, you have a duty to report it to the police on your own under those same parameters, $500 or any sort of an injury. What goes into them is pretty much anything you would say. I'll share one police report with you that has always kind of stuck with me. The bicyclist, if you can see this report, is U2, which is Unit 2. I'm going to try and zoom in to some extent. Anything you say to an officer could make it into the report. This guy was so far afoul of best practices here, it's laughable. But when the bicyclist impacted the car, so U2 impacted U1, the driver impacted the windshield. The bicyclist stated he took a line of meth earlier. The bicyclist said he was driving at approximately 25 miles an hour. He was riding fast. He also stated that he observed the other vehicle. He observed the other vehicle and did not make an attempt to stop or perform evasive action. Not good. We did not accept that case. But just be aware that anything you say might go into the police report. The other report I really wanted to show you was a one out of New Orleans. And if you can see the diagram at the bottom here, we have a bicyclist coming from the right to the left on South Dupree Street. This is right behind the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office off of Tulane. The bicyclist coming from right to left, the bicyclist has a stop sign. There's a car coming from Perdido Street from the top to the bottom, and there's a crash right here in the intersection according to the police report. If you look at the narrative, the driver of vehicle 1 was transported to University Medical Center with traumatic injuries, so the officer wasn't able to talk to the bicyclist. Vehicle 1, which is the bicyclist, pulled out right in front of him, which is the car, too close to stop, causing the front bumper of the car to strike the right side of the bicyclist. So the responding officer gave a citation. Typically they see issued. In this case, he was awarded a citation for a violation of failure to yield. So we get this police report, and it's like, well, that doesn't look great. You know, this bicyclist is running the stop sign. We then get reached out to by kind of a witness who had nothing to do with the case, but just knew that something was a foul. And he wanted us to see that that wasn't really what was happening. So I'll show you the video. And then again, this is very important why videos should be looked at in any case where they can be. I'm gonna stop sharing and pull this up. All right, this is from the top of the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, and this is footage. You're gonna have to look really hard. So just to orient you, if you can see, Laura, can you see my mouse as I'm moving it around on here?
Yes, I can see it.
All right, so the motor vehicle is coming down Perdido right here, going this way. The bicyclist is coming this way. So there's a stop sign right here. And so you'll see the bicyclist, again, this is a little bit grainy, but it shows us all that we need to see. You'll see the bicyclist approaching here. And so according to the police report, the bicyclist runs the stop sign and gets hit in the roadway, we'll say right around like here. So here's what happens. And we'll play it again. But what the video shows is that this driver goes right here. You can see the bicyclist start coming out of the top of the frame right here. This driver is fully into a turn right there, striking this guy on the bike before he ever even gets to the stop sign or the intersection. And so that's not to say that the driver was intentionally lying or providing fraudulent information to the police. He may have just remembered it wrong. Again, it has the same effect. It's very dangerous when you're just relying on that. It's also very self-serving. So anytime we can find video, we obviously want to do that because that changed the entire case, and we're able to resolve this case for this guy in a way that we never would have without this video. So I'm going to try and wrap this up by 1:30. So we've got just a few minutes left. I'm going to click around and jump through to what to some of the more important other topics that I'd like to cover. Why crashes happen and these statistics, it's about even with who's at fault with reported statistics between somebody driving a vehicle versus somebody riding a bike. The reason that police reports are so important is because like this. These are national statistics provided by the League of American Bicyclists. These statistics are skewed because they do not include hit and run crashes and other crashes that are not reported by people who are riding bikes. These are just based on reported crashes. And so if the crash isn't being reported, it's not going to make its way into bigger picture statistics, which are then relied on by policymakers and traffic engineers for more safe setups into the future. So we highly encourage crash reporting for that reason alone. Hangdale Carrollton, there are in certain parts of Carrollton unmarked lanes which bikes are fine to ride on, people riding bikes are fine to ride on. Sharrows, as you'll see in the second picture, don't provide any additional protections, but it will show that it's a preferred route for bicyclists to use. And really, if you look at the tip of the chevron on top of this bicycle that's pinned onto the ground, it's supposed to be an indicator of where you should be positioning your bike to be out of this door zone on the side, but also not fully to the left. We've seen that applied properly and misapplied in New Orleans infrastructure. But either way, it's more of a reminder to everybody that this is a more bike-friendly corridor. And then, of course, a bike lane all the way on the far right side provides a right-of-way to somebody on a bike. So essentially, you have the right to enter the space in front of you without yielding to anybody. And the difference between the unmarked lane, the Sharrow versus a bike lane, let's say, for instance, you've got traffic that's stopped all to the left side of you, and they're queued up, motor vehicle traffic. You can just proceed all the way up the bike lane without any sort of fear that somebody should legally come in front of you. Whereas if you're in a share situation or an unmarked lane, it's a little bit more of a question of whether you should be passing on the left, passing on the right, things like that. People driving motor vehicles are not allowed to drive in a bike lane unless they're turning and they're entering within 200 feet of an intersection or accessing a private driveway or parking. But either way, you have to yield to anybody who's actually using a bike in a bike lane before you would start to turn into that. Coming down Esplanade Avenue, again, finishing our ride in the presentation. Just a word on distracted driving. Statistics show that you are 23 times more likely to get in a crash if you are driving while you're distracted. There's a lot of difficulties enforcing distracted driving. It's not like there's an easy breathalyzer like somebody who's driving while under the influence of alcohol. There are ways that you can pull the data off of an actual phone device. That's rarely done unless there's a major crash, and the responding law enforcement has that capability. And another big part of this too is people rarely admit to texting while driving. So it's something that's posing a challenge now and will into the future. Louisiana law says that you cannot text, you cannot send or receive a written communication, which would be an email, a text, while you're driving. You cannot be using any sort of a social media site or application as well. And then anyone from 17 or under is prohibited from using any sort of mobile device. And then we're all prohibited from using a mobile device while we're in a school zone. There are ways that we can go and see if somebody was actually texting or making a phone call while they were driving. And I'm showing you just a screenshot of a spreadsheet that we can get from a carrier. I believe this one was from Verizon. And the important thing to note here is if you see the yellow line, where you look in this middle column G, it's basically where the first cell tower is, where a call was made. And then the last serving cell face is the tower that you were on for your cell service when you ended the call. And so that allows us to see, somebody might say, oh, I'm never making calls when I drive. I always pull over, I'm not moving. This shows that they were moving. You're only hitting a cell tower and jumping to another cell tower if you're driving at least, let's call it at least 2 to 3 miles. Each cell tower has a range around it of around 13 square miles. And so you're going to stick with one cell tower unless you're really jumping over to another one because that's a better signal and it makes more sense. We can see if somebody's in a text chain, one discrete message to another mobile device back to them, and we can follow the numbers and we can follow the towers. So if they're saying we weren't texting while we were driving, we can literally follow the text chain with the timing of it and see if somebody was based on which towers they're hitting. Being visible, very important, just lighting and conspicuity. Anything you can do to make yourself more visible and predictable while riding your bike in New Orleans is going to be better. And then I think that just about sums it up so we can finish on time. Laura, I'll turn back over to you for just a second if you've got anything else you'd like to add. But otherwise, my door is always open. If anybody has questions, give me a call, shoot me an email. We do this pretty much all day, every day in terms of dealing with bike issues in the law. So I'm here anyways. Please use this as a resource and reach out. But otherwise, if anybody has any questions today, I'm happy to answer them. If you want to reach out later, Heidi, reach out to me later on. We can catch up separately and we can go from there. But Laura, anything else you want to add?
Not too much. Thanks a lot, Charlie. That was really great. I think this is a great opportunity to open it up if anyone has any specific questions about anything. I'm also going to drop in this link here for a feedback survey. So we're still kind of, adapting to doing these virtual workshops. So we'd be happy to get any feedback from y'all on how to make them better. So fill out the survey link. I'll also send y'all a follow-up email with this link as well. And we'll be doing our next virtual workshop is going to be our people-friendly driving class, and we're going to be doing that May 12th. So hopefully y'all can join us for that as well. Anyone have any questions?
I just want to say thank you very much, Charlie.
You're so welcome. Thank y'all for tuning in. All right, if you need anything, you know where to find me. And otherwise, everybody stay safe and healthy and productive. And we'll catch up next time.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining. Also, we've been recording this presentation and we'll be posting it on the Bike Easy YouTube channel. So if you forgot something and want to go back and check, we'll have that as a resource for y'all.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
All right, everybody have a great day. Thanks for joining.
Hey, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Go on. Get a camera.